So let's start over here. We're in the middle of the discussion. They changed, he put all the rabbis in different rooms and they made various changes, and Hashem miraculously gave in the mind of all the different rabbis to give the exact same interpretation. They made changes just to set off some problems they might have with Talmud Hamelech. The Gemara Rabbi Yehuda gave a reason why they allowed the Greek, but because of that incident, what happened, they had to interpret the Talmud in Greek. But the Gemara brings down all the changes. He put them each one into 72 homes, 72 rabbis, elders, sages, and he didn't tell them what, so they don't have why he's sending them in their different rooms. And then he surprised them and he says, I want you to write me the Torah of Moshe. And Hashem gave each one the same idea, and they all made the changes that were necessary that they felt. So we're in the middle of the change. We're up to over here in the verse in Shmois Yud Beis, Pasuk Mem. So this talks about after Yitzias Mitzrayim, after the Jews left Egypt. So the pasuk says that Umoishav b'nei Yisrael asher yoshvu b'Mitzrayim, the settlement or the time that the b'nei Yisrael sat in Mitzrayim. Now in the pasuk there isn't the words ubishar arotzis. In the pasuk is they sat in Mitzrayim, Arba Meis Shana. They sat for 400 years. They changed and they said that they sat in Egypt and in other countries was 400 years. They didn't just say Mitzrayim, but they added the word Shararotzis. As we'll see in the Rashi in a minute, a very simple calculation will tell you that they couldn't have been 400 years in Mitzrayim in order to offset the argument of Talmai, King Talmai, who is certainly going to challenge them when he reads this pasuk that the Yidden lived in Mitzrayim, the Bnei Israel were in Mitzrayim for 400 years. In order to offset his argument, his critique, and he would say the Torah couldn't be true because it really doesn't fit with the facts, they added the word Ubishar Arotzus. Because in Mitzrayim itself, if you just count, all the years of Kahos was the son of Levi. Okay, there was 3 sons, Gershon, Kahos, and Merari. So Kahos was the son of Levi. If you see when the pasuk tells you about all the children, the 70 souls that came down to Egypt, one of them is Kahos. Kahos is that means that Kahos was in Mitzrayim, and Kahos had a son whose name was Amram. Amram had a son whose name was Moshe. So if you take the years, all the years the Torah says that Kahos lived, okay? I'm going to say off the top of my head, I think 127, or whatever the number is. Kahos lived. And you take all the years that Amram lived, and you take all the years that Moshe Rabbeinu, you add them up, it doesn't come to 400. And Kahos did not really go down to Mitzrayim when he was born. He was already, and you can't add the years of the son fully because the father has the son, and some of the years of the father's life, the son is alive. But here, even if you piled up, you just took the years of Kahos, you just took the years of Amram, and you just took the years of Moshe, you add them up, you still have nowhere close to 400, minus all these years in which they lived together. So how were they actually 400 years? So therefore he added the words Ubishar Arotzis, so we shouldn't ask any question. He says they were in other places as well, So it's not going to be a conflict. But the real meaning of it is, as Rashi explains, in the Chumash and also here now in the Gemara, that Hashem says that they will be 400 years in a land that was not theirs. Rashi makes the calculation that from when Yitzchak was born, from that time already, they never lived in their land. They were in Pelishtim. Avram was in Pelishtim, was a land that didn't belong, wasn't Eretz Yisrael. And they journeyed all through Yitzchak, through Yaakov, and all the way through Moshe Rabbeinu. From the birth of Yitzchak until Moshe Rabbeinu left, the 210 years they were in Egypt, Rashi will make the cheshbon, they weren't in their land. That's what was meant by 400 years. 400 years was meant from the birth of Yitzchak. Hashem didn't say that you will be for 400 years in Mitzrayim. Hashem said you will be 400 years in a land which is not yours. So therefore, we don't consider only Mitzrayim, all the lands, again, starting from when Yitzchak was born till the Jews left Egypt was 400 years. But that was not something that Talmud was going to understand or agree. So therefore, they changed the wording in the pasuk to which that they lived in Mitzrayim and also in the other lands. Let's look at the Rashi. Rashi, so that he shouldn't say, that's King Talmud, shouldn't say, Sheker Kosud Batoira. There is a lie that is written in the Torah. What's going to be the proof to that? Shari Kahos Meyerde Mitzrayim Hoya. So Kahos, the son of Levi, he descended in Mitzrayim, because if you take a look in the pasuk, who went down, the 70 people, who was one down to Mitzrayim? So one of those people is actually Kahos. And so now, so we know, so Ukashato Moine, Shnoisov Shel Kahos. The Torah tells you the number. Actually, that's the reason to tell you there. But the Torah counts the years of Kahos. The Torah also tells you Shnoisov Shel Amram. Amram was Kahos' son. So when you add up the years that Kahos lived, entire life, and you add up the years of Amram, Shnoisov Shel Amram, the years that Amram lived. Amram was Moshe Rabbeinu's father. You add up Shnoisov Shel Moshe, and you add up the years of Moshe. So if you add all of these years together, Kulam Ein Magiyas L'Dalid Meyis Shana. It's not going to come to 400 years. You don't have 400 years. Plus Kahos's years, plus Amram's years, plus their entire life, what they lived, doesn't come to 400. Kolchkin, how much more so that it's not even their full life you can't count. A lot of the years of the sons. So when you say that Amram, that Moshe Rabbeinu lived, whatever age you say they lived, but that's still part of their life, was part of the years of Amram lived. Part of the years that Amram lived is in the life of Kahos, because Amram is not born on the day that Kahos died. Neither is Moshe Rabbeinu born on the day that Amram died. So therefore, meaning that Harbe Mishnois Habonim, a lot of the years of the son, Nivloyim B'toich Shnois Ha'ovis, are swallowed within the years of the father. Okay, so therefore that is the problem that they had with Talmud, that he's not going to understand the pasuk, and that's why they added the B'shara Rotzos. But now Rashi is going to explain, but so what is it real? What is the real meaning of it? But the Torah says, what does the Torah mean when it says that they were 40 years in Mitzrayim? Elo Shemona HaKosuf. The pasuk counts here, even though it says the Yoshvu b'Mitzrayim, the Torah counts here the Yom Shenigzra Gzeira Golus Mitzrayim, from when the decree of Golus Mitzrayim was decreed. Because there is the actual exile of Mitzrayim, and then there is the decree of Golus Mitzrayim. Bein Absorim. That was between the pieces when Hashem said to Avram go between the pieces and made the covenant with Avram. So that is when Hashem told him, that your children, your seed, will be a stranger in the other land. That's called the Gzeda of Golus Mitzrayim. Actually, that was done 30 years before Yitzchak was born. But the Gzeda, Golus Mitzrayim, goes back 30 years, but the 400 years is from when Yitzchak was born. Misham from there, from the Gzeda of Golus Mitzrayim ben Absorim ad shenoled Yitzchak, until Yitzchak was born, is Shloshim Shana, was 30 years. And Umeshenoled Yitzchak ad sheyotzu Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, and from when Yitzchak was born until the Jews left Egypt, Arba Meish Shana is 400 years. So this pasuk that says that they said the Mitzrayim means the Gzeidas Golus Mitzrayim minus the 30 years until Yitzchak was born. So how do we have from Yitzchak's birth until they went out of Mitzrayim 400 years? Because from the 400 years, we have 400 years. We know that works out. But the question is, how do we get the actual time that they spent in Mitzrayim? So 400 years was from the birth of Yitzchak, which he was born in Plishtim, so it's also in a strange land. We'll see in the Rashi in a minute. And so from his birth till they went out of Mitzrayim, we have 400 years. How much time did they actually spend in Mitzrayim? They spent 210 years in Mitzrayim. Why? He says like this: Tzei mehem shishim shel Yitzchak. Take out the 60 of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak lived 60 years and then he gave birth. It says that when Yitzchak was 60 years old, he gave birth to Yaakov. Okay? So we know that 130 years, Yaakov says, when Yaakov came to Egypt, he came to Pharaoh, he asked him, how old you are? Okay, so he says, so he told him that he was 130 years old when he came to Egypt. So if he came to Egypt when he was 130 years old, and he was born when Yitzchak was 60 years old, so if you add the time of Yitzchak's birth to the years of Yitzchak, in other words, Yitzchak was older than Yaakov 60 years because Yitzchak gave birth to Yaakov at the age of 60. So that means that Yitzchak was 60 years older than Yaakov. And since Yaakov was 130 when he comes to Mitzrayim, so how many years is it from when Yitzchak was born? 210 years, because it's 130 plus 60, right? 130. No, 1 second. So you take out, no, I'm sorry. So I'm sorry, we have to, it's 190. So 40, because in other words, they didn't come to Egypt until 190 years after Yitzchak's birth, okay? Yitzchak was born, he lived 60 years, he gave birth to Yaakov, and Yaakov lived for 130, so now we have 190. 190 minus the 400 years, which they were. So Nisharu Masayim Ve'eser. So that's why there was 210. So in Egypt, from the birth of Yitzchak till they went out is 400 years. But we have to minus the time they were actually in Egypt. We have to minus the 190 years from the 400 before Yaakov came to Egypt, before the Golus began. So therefore, so it says, so this was the decree. So don't ask the question. So you're going to say, but the Torah says here, it seems like they were 400 years in Egypt. So he says the decree to beginning was, that your children will be, your seed will be a stranger in not their own land. But if it doesn't say that they're going to be in Egypt. It says, it only says they're going to be in a land which is not theirs. So he says, therefore, Yitzchak. And when Yitzchak was born, Avram Gor, that it's Plishtim. He was living at the time in Plishtim. By Avimelech, we have the story, Avimelech took her then. So he was living there by Avimelech. From that time, from the birth in which there was not their land, in Plishtim, when Yitzchak was born, until they went up to Mitzrayim, so then it turns out that Yitzchak and his children, which is Zarei Shel Avram, Yitzchak and Yitzchak's children, Yitzchak's Yaakov, Avram, they were all Gadim, they were all converts now. So, we know now that starting, but the question is, so why don't we count from the beginning? Because Avram was not in the land even the 30 years before. Why don't we count the 30 years of the Bris Ben Absorim? So Rashi says, Ushloishim shel kodim l'kein, the 30 years that preceded Yitzchak's birth. Lo nimnu b'gzeira. They weren't counted in the Gzeira. Doho zaracha ksiv. Hashem says, your seed will be Be'eretz lo ilahem. So it turns out like this. The Yidden were in Mitzrayim 210 years. That's the time that they spent in Mitzrayim. Why? Because we know that from the time that Yitzchak was born until the Yidden left Mitzrayim, we know that was 400 years, because that's the way it works out. Rashi doesn't bring the calculation here, but in the Chumash, Rashi says that it was 400 years from the time that Yitzchak was born until they left Mitzrayim. How many years did he actually spend in Mitzrayim? It was 210 years, because after 190 years of his birth, of Yitzchak's birth, Yaakov came to Mitzrayim. So that means that in Mitzrayim, they actually spent 210 years. But the Torah counts it as if they spent 400 years, because since the Torah said your seed will be there, and the Gezerah started already when Hashem told them, when they went through the covenant with Beis Ben Absorim, that your children will be in a land that is not theirs. It doesn't say Mitzrayim, not theirs. So this means that everything is counted. But we don't start counting from the time of Beis Ben Absorim, because it's not Zarach. Hashem says your seed will be a stranger. So we have to start with Yitzchak. When Yitzchak was, actually in another pasuk, it does say 400 years, 430 years. In that case, we do count the Brisbane Absurdim from that time. But over here in this pasuk, it says Ubshara Rotzis, they added that. I have to see what they did with the other pasuk as well. But there is a verse, I believe that there is a verse that says that they were 430 years. That would start from Brisbane Absurdim. Anyways, is this clear? I mean, it's confusing. You get it, how it turns out?
Yeah. A little confusing.
Okay, so now we'll go to the next thing. Over here, this is talking about Matan Torah. This is actually in the Parsha of Mishpatim. Parsha of Yisro talks about Matan Torah. Then again, after Shvi, in the portion of Mishpatim, we talk again of some details. It talks about who brought the korbanos. So the verse says there, Vayishlach es nare b'nei Yisrael. So it says that he sent nare b'nei Yisrael. Nare means the youngsters, and they brought the korbanos over there. It seems almost disrespectful to send the youngsters to bring the korbanos. And it was worried, the rabbis were worried, the Zkenim, that Talmud wouldn't look at this favorably. And he would say that, oh, why would you send the youngsters to greet the Shekhinah? They were bringing the korbanos, they were getting prepared to the divine coming down on the Aseres HaDibros, Matan Torah. So therefore, they changed it instead of nare to zatuti. Zatuti is a expression of an importance. He sent the importance of the Bnei Yisrael, not the nare Bnei Yisrael. So Rashi, zatuti, Rashi loshon chashivus. That's a language of importance. Avol nare, but when you say nare, vayishlach nare, the way the pasuk says, loshon katnus. That's a language of small, unimportant. The Yoimar, and then he might say, Talmai, Gruim shalachem shalachtem lekabel pnei shchina. You send the worst, the degraded ones, is the ones that you send to agree the shchina. So therefore, they changed it from nare, which the pasuk said, "Vayishlach es nare," and they put in the word zatuti. Zatuti means important. Okay. In that same pasuk, the pasuk also tells us an incident that the people, they went and they gazed at Hashem, and Hashem did not do anything about it. But the Torah refers to the people that looked at Hashem. This is the way the pasuk is written: Atzilei b'nei Yisrael. Atzilei could mean the distinguished, the separated ones, the great ones. But here too, he changed it to Vel Zatuti. They, all the rabbis, all the skinny, changed Zatuti. Because if he sent the Zatuti, so the verse should be consistent by saying Vel Zatuti b'nei Yisrael. So therefore, he changed that as well. Look at Rashi. See, this follows. This is Chavdalad Hey, and this is Chavdalad Yudalef. This talks about when he sent them. Then it says that they vayechzu, vayechlu, vayishtu, vayechzu, they saw Hashem. And then it says, Vel Zatuti b'nei Yisrael, lo yisholach yodei. So Rashi says over here, Ba'isa Parsha Atzma, that's in that same Parsha of Shemois, in that same portion, it says, Zatuti b'nei Yisrael, Lefi shekosvu Zatuti tchila, since the Zikanim wrote in the beginning Zatuti. So over here was no problem writing Elatzile, that's important. But since they already changed it to Zatuti, Chozru v'kosvum kishmam harishon. So they're going back and they wrote it, they used the first name, the number of Zatuti. And they didn't write Ve'el Atzile B'nei Yisrael because they did not want to change it from the previous one. The first time the pasuk calls them Nare. So they changed it. But once they changed it from Nare to Zatute, even though they didn't have to change Atzile, but they changed it to Zatute as well, so that it's consistent with what they start. Okay, we'll go to Amid Beis. Go to Amid Beis. So we're up to Tes Amid Beis. We'll continue with different psukim, and this talks about the machloikis with Korach, when finally with Dosam and Aviram, they came out and very disrespectful to Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu praised Hashem, don't accept their mincha, and he says in his talk to Hashem, he says, Loi chamoir echod mehem nasosi. He says, I never took even a donkey from them. But the words is, he didn't take a donkey from them. Rashi explains, even when it was coming to free the Bnei Yisrael, and so he bought his own donkey, so he didn't take it, even though when he could have or he should have taken it from the people. So the pasuk says, Loi chamoir echod mehem nasosi. They changed it to Loi chemed. Lo chemed. Why did they change it? Because Talmud would not understand if he says, I didn't take a donkey from you. Well, a donkey is a little bit expensive. So maybe something which is less than a donkey, he did take. So chamoir is not such a cheap thing. So they would say, oh, he didn't take a donkey, but maybe he took other stuff from them. So that's why they said loy chemed, any desire. In other words, I didn't take anything from you. Loy chemed echad mehem nasosi. I didn't take anyone from you. So I say the real reason was because he was trying to tell them that even those things that by right, when I was traveling to save you from Midian, he took his own chamoir, but yet I didn't take it from you. I paid first from my pocket. So they changed it. So Rashi says, but he would not accept. So he says, so that he shouldn't say, Talmai shouldn't say, he didn't take a donkey, but did take another object. So that's why they changed it chemed. Chemed would mean any object, nothing that I wanted. I didn't take anything from you. Yeah, then we talk about Avodah Zorah in the Parshat Dvarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu is instructing the Yidden in Perek Daled Pasuk Yutes. He says, you should not really worship Avodah Zorah. Avodah Zorah, Hashem gave to other Hashem gave to the others. So the pasuk says, if you look at the pasuk, see there. So the pasuk says, "Pen tisoy necha shomayim," you raise your eyes skywards. You see the sun and the moon. And the stars called so Hashemayim, all the stars of the heaven. And you will get, you'll be swayed. You'll bite the va'avadatom and you'll worship them. So then the pasuk says, "Asher cholach Hashem elekecha oisam lechol ha'amim." Hashem has separated them for all the nation. Tachas kol hashemayim, under the heaven. Basically, this pasuk seems to say that it's okay for the Chol Ha'amim to worship the sun and the moon and the stars. He says, you might get pushed away and you'll start bowing and worship them. Hashem has given them for all the nations that are under the sky. So, but really what it means, as the Gemara says, what they explained to them, so he added the word, not to worship, but lahoir lahem. That is to provide light for them. That's what they did. It provides light. So therefore, he changed it. They added the word Isam. So he says not l'chol ha'amim to worship, but lahoir. Hashem has distinguished them to light, to bring light. The sun, the moon, that brings light to the world. Why did they add that word? So Rashi, lahoir l'chol ha'amim. Shim loikein, for if not so, Yoimari will argue ben noach mutar b'avodah zarah, that a ben noach is permissible or avodah zarah. What does it actually mean that Hashem has given it to them? So Rashi says Hashem has allowed them to slip. Medrashay cholak means not that Hashem gave him a portion like a chelik, but cholak is like to slip. Hashem has allowed them, not that Hashem says they should worship Avodah Zarah, but Hashem has allowed them to make a mistake. Umedrashe, as the Gemara says, hey, is lachlikom b'devorim. Hashem gives them with matters to allow for them to slip, in order to get them pushed away from this world. In other words, allows them for them to make the mistake, so they will lose this world. But the point here is that's what it means by Cholak Hashem Alekecha. But he translated them lahoir to shine to them. That's the way they translated it for Talmud. All these came. Then we have a pasuk in the Vorim Perek Yud Zayin Gimel. Also, it says Vayelech Vayaved Elikim Acherim. It's talking about the rebuke of a person goes. He went and he worshipped other gods. Asher lo yitzivisi, that I have not commanded. What did Hashem not command? Maybe we would translate it, Hashem did not command that they should be. He went and worshipped God, other gods that I had not commanded that they should be in existence. So it comes out that they were created. Rashi learns that they were created even though God didn't command that they should be. So they added the words of the Tzvisi La'ovdom, that I have commanded not to worship them. That was the added word, La'ovdom. So if it would have just said in the pasuk, if they were recorded that way, it would seem that Hashem did not instruct that the Lekim Acherim should be. It's a Lekim Acherim Ashlei Tzivisi. I've not commanded them to be. So he says, no, Lekim Acherim Ashlei Tzivisi La'ovdom. That's Rashi. Asher Loi Tzivisi La'ovdom. It says, doesn't mean I did not command. It means I commanded not to worship. Had they not right for Talmud and Melech to worship it, then it comes out, I didn't instruct, I didn't want them to be in existence. So then what will he say? Hashem did not command them, and yet they're here. In that case, they are godly. They're why? Because he didn't command them to be, and against his will they were created. So therefore, that would allow for them to make that mistake. And finally, the final thing is the Kosvuloi, and they also wrote to him as Seiras Haraglayim. The short hands, basically. Seir means small, younger, short feet. Rashi brings down, that's another name for a rabbit. A rabbit's feet, the hind legs are big. The front legs are small. That's why he jumps the rabbit. So they called him Tziras Haraglayim. They changed the name from Arneves, from rabbit, to Tziras Haraglayim. The Gemara says that his wife was Lekos V'loi Es Arneves. When Torah talks about the things that are not kosher, it talks about the Arneves, about the rabbit. And the reason they did so is because Talmai's wife, her name was Arneves. It happened to be her name. Arneves Shema. Her name is Arneves. And then he might say, Shelo Yoimar, so then he shouldn't say, Sochagu bi HaYehudim, the Jews are making fun of me, V'tilu Shem Ishti BaTorah, and they placed the name of my wife in the Torah. So they changed it from Arneves to Tziras Haraglayim. Rashi says, V'kosvu, V'mekoim V'es Arneves, what did they write? V'es Tziras Haraglayim. That's what they wrote over there. Why do we call a rabbit Tziras Haraglayim? Tziras, young or short feet, is the Pishayodeho Ktsoris, or Kutanos Ragleo, because her hands are shorter and smaller than her feet. So they call her Tziras Haraglayim because of those hands that make her short. It's interesting, so all these reasonings of the Arneves, and it would be interesting to go through. There's so many other verses in the Torah that seemingly could be misinterpreted, and the fact the Gemara counts out, it almost seems like, because the Gemara brings down two psukim from Devarim here, one pasuk from Bamidbar, and over here you have a pasuk of Shemois, and you have several psukim of Bereshis. So you have Bereshis, Shemois, but we don't have Vayikra, because apparently Vayikra there wasn't any. There's no Vayikra here, Bamidbar. So it goes through from Bereshis, but it almost seems like it covers all the Torah, not that it just gives you some sampling here, because he goes, or maybe it is some sampling. I don't know, because there seems like it could be similar to these difficulties. There could be more difficulties. Or maybe these are the only real difficulties. But I guess the great miracle here was that notwithstanding that they were all in separate rooms and they all were supposed to interpret, they all came up with exactly the same. That's really an amazing idea that everybody came up with the same. Anyways, so we'll start at that part. Mitzvah Shem next week, and like I said, next week we'll start at 8:15 on Tuesday. Okay, Mitzvah Shem. So this parsha, just to give a word on the parsha of Kisovo, so it's very interesting. Kisovo, he talks about gratitude and being grateful. Hakaras hatov, the fact that when a person goes into Eretz Yisrael and he gets a portion of Yisrael, he plows the land, the food grows, and he's very thankful to Hashem for everything that Hashem has given him. And he goes and brings the first fruit, the Bikurim, he brings them to the Beis HaMikdash, he brings them to Yerushalayim, and he says, proclaims, I'm coming here to say about the great land that Hashem has given me and all the beautiful things. Okay, that's a very important mitzvah, and it teaches us how important it is to be grateful. However, the pasuk says in the beginning that the mitzvah of Bikurim only started 14 years after they came into the land of Israel, because it took them 7 years to first conquer all of Israel. Certain things were conquered right in the beginning. So the certain tribes got right away, but then it took them 7 years to conquer, another 7 years to divide it the parts amongst all the different tribes and all the families. It took them 14 years. So the Torah says, that the mitzvah of Bikurim does not start until after 14 years. So it turns out, let's say a person who got the first year, okay, not considering Orla or whatever other things, but seems like why should he wait 14 years? I mean, shouldn't you be grateful? Okay, so the other person, whenever he will be grateful, whenever he'll have his bikurim, he'll bring the bikurim. Why do we have to wait 14 years for the bring the bikurim? The Rebbe gives a very fascinating idea over here. Says the whole idea of bikurim is simcha. We're all happy. The person is happy and thankful for Hashem. But the truth is, the matter is that you can't really be fully happy if you know that your fellow Jew, another person going into Israel, he doesn't have his part yet. He can't be b'simcha. So I can't be fully b'simcha with my part that I have before everybody gets their part. It's only after the land was inhabited and everybody got their parts that in that case over there, the simcha really was fully. So it means to us, be grateful to Hashem, to another person who does you a favor, but it also means that we can't really be fully grateful at my simcha if another person doesn't have a simcha. We should see to it that we all have a simcha. The new year will be a blessing for all Klal Yisrael. A good Gebenshir. I'll see you next week.